Hey everyone, welcome to the weekend edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me for the Weekend Review show this week, first time we've had him live on the air, Charles Heller. He's, of course, with Liberty Watch Radio, and Charles and I do the audio and the video for Gun Rights Policy Conference every year if you are not able to attend GRPC and you tune in over the internet, you see and hear what you see and hear because of Charles and me. Also joining me, Mike Piwowarski, Arms Room Radio and The Rundown, and Alex Olley of the Olley Law Offices in Indiana. Alex, we were talking just yesterday. We had you on for the Friday edition of The Bullet, and we're going to be covering some of those same stories today because two of the stories are actually really big stories for the week. But let's go ahead and get started as soon as I get and close. Everybody who may not know, I had an issue with the broadcast software. It was showing just a picture of Mike Piwowarski. Nobody wants that.
Not even me.
I had to restart my computer at 2 minutes before the hour. And it's taken me this long to get the live broadcast up. So that's why we're just.
You mean to get my picture late. Out of your monitor?
Yes. Yes. I don't want my monitor ruined, dude.
Yep. Just that looking at you all day.
All right. And I want to remind everybody as we get started, if you would like to comment on either the Facebook or YouTube videos. We'll get your comment up. If we're still live when you're commenting, we'll put your comment up and we'll discuss your comment on the air. If you're catching us on OpsLens or anywhere else, you can also tweet with the hashtag BulletPodcast. That actually gets to me the fastest. And if, for example, you're on Facebook, sometimes Facebook doesn't like to send me comments. If you've commented, you think it's a really good comment, you haven't seen it hit, and you want me to get it on the air, tweet with the hashtag Bullet Podcast. That gets through right away, and I'll get your comment up. We'll discuss it. Gentlemen, for the weekend review, the first thing I want to talk about as soon as I get my show notes open, because I got to read this. I did not memorize it. We've had
New York counties begin requiring gun stores to post warning against owning guns.
That actually moved. That's the second story. This is the top story I want to talk about is something my boss did, and this actually happened on Wednesday. Second Amendment Foundation filed for a motion for summary judgment in a federal lawsuit in Minnesota challenging the state's ban on concealed carry by young adults between the ages of 18 and 21, alleging the ban violates the Second and 14th Amendment rights of those citizens. Lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court for Minnesota, known as Worth versus Harrington. And joining SAF are Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus, Firearms Policy Coalition, and 3 private citizens. This is all the trend in the anti-gun states, guys, is that they want to ban anybody from 18 to 21 from buying any firearms. And look, you turn 18, you can join the military without your parents' permission. You can join a police force without your parents' permission. You can enter a contract. There's all kinds of things you can do. When I turned 18, I was legally able to drink. That's been a day or two ago. If 18 is an adult, then 18 is an adult, and they need to be able to access all their rights. Charles, since you're the first time on the show with us today, I'm going to start with you. Your thoughts on this one, man?
Well, I too was able to drink at 18, and growing up in Chicago, I didn't cherish the privilege to drink like I did the right to keep and bear arms, so I kept them very separate, and I always have. And but I agree with you. I mean, you're either a citizen or you're not. It's not an either or. I mean, you're one thing or the other. And if you're an adult, then you are entitled to all the privileges and immunities of your adulthood. And if you're not, well then, why are you paying taxes?
Yeah, then they are specifically. I mean, I have a problem with taxes to start with, but this is a gun show, so we're gonna stick with guns and guns rights. But um,
Right.
18-year-olds generally pay more taxes than other age groups because they do not have deductions yet. So yeah,
Well, at least they pay a higher proportion.
yeah. I'm gonna go, Mike. What are your thoughts, bud?
Yeah, it's you're an adult or you're not. Like you said, you're 18 years old. You have the ability to do everything else. We know that U.S. code tells us that you start an adult when you're 18 years old as well. It was 17 originally, now 18. That's when under its definition of militia, when you can defend our nation. I guess you're just not going to be able to defend it with the firearm. This is just another one of those steps, Paul. When I was on earlier in the week with you, we talked about how to eat the elephant. It's one bite at a time, and that's been the anti-gunners policies forever and ever. Now you have 18 to 20, which cannot carry or conceal firearms. We know that 18 to 20 cannot purchase a handgun from an FFL. That's on the books now, and in many other states, post what we saw down in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, they went and eliminated the purchase of long guns from 18 to 20-year-olds. So it's just more bites out of that elephant that they continue to take away from us. And luckily we've got people like your boss and the others there at FPC as well that help to get them back.
Absolutely, Alex. You're the attorney. And I should have in your introduction. I should have explained you are an actual attorney, and one of them that I get along with. And there aren't many, but what are your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, so the Second Amendment, clearly says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and 18 to 20-year-olds are clearly part of the people. And in fact, if you read some of the correspondence from the time of the founding, I know, for instance, George Washington was writing about participation in the militia, and not only did 18 to 20-year-olds have the right to keep and bear arms, they were expected to keep and bear arms, so that if they were required to participate in the militia or were called to participate in the militia, they would bring their own firearms. They were expected to bring their own firearms. And in light of the recent decision from the Supreme Court in Bruin, I think this is clearly a law that would not be consistent with the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment. And that I think that's consistent throughout the history of this country. And, I think what's important to understand about this and why this is encouraging, I think that the Second Amendment Foundation through this lawsuit will prevail. I think it's pretty much a slam dunk in light of the Bruin decision. This case was filed, my understanding was last year, and I think they still had a leg to stand on. But it would have been much more difficult because the federal courts were largely applying a interest balancing test, and the court in Bruin explicitly rejected this interest balancing and said that challenges to the Second Amendment needed to be reviewed under text, history, and tradition. And I think it will clearly fail that test.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get the comment up. John over on the Facebook side says, and yet they wanted 16-year-olds to vote. I'm going to say that between the right to keep and bear arms and the right to vote is the more powerful of the two. If you lose your right to vote, you lose your choice in the direction of our country all the way down to your local town. So you just have to go with the flow. I'm going to fight for both, but I don't necessarily, I guess, the right to keep and bear arms, I'm willing to go on a case-by-case basis. There are 16-year-olds that I know that are absolutely responsible enough to carry concealed in public and purchase their own firearms. I would have no problem with that. There are 25-year-olds that I'm a little scared of in that neighborhood. So I I'm good with the voting age being 18. It needs to be when you become an adult, you are an adult. I think that's my opinion.
Paul, if I may,
Yep.
I disagree with you on a case by case basis. I think our rights should never be on a case by case basis. I think that our rights should be, to the extent that we have them, and if we abuse our rights to a great enough degree, they can be removed through due process of law. That's the only case by case I'm willing to go by. I'm willing to live with the risk of people abusing their rights and then having them possibly taken away for cause. But saying on a case by case basis is actually a pre-Bruin mindset. You can't do that.
What I was referring to is a 16-year-old, which currently is not legal. I would be okay with.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm with you. If you've got the right, if the right exists, everybody should have the right until they prove they're not capable of utilizing
Right.
that right.
Innocent
I'll just
until proven guilty.
And I'll just add to Paul. I think that certainly the right to vote is an important right, but it's a civic right. It's a civic duty. It's not. There's no natural right to vote, whereas the right to self-defense is a natural right, and the right to bear arms as an extension of that right, I think precedes the right to vote, and in fact is the very thing that I think protects our right to vote. So I would suggest that the right to keep and bear arms is more important than the right to vote. And it reminds me of a quote. I'm going to not say it exactly right, but it's something like a government, a citizenry that fears its government is tyranny. A government that fears its citizens is, a republic or a constitutional free society. So that's not exactly how the quote goes, but that's the gist of it. And I think that an armed citizenry is one that can keep its government in check and can protect its right to vote.
Right.
So that's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm trying to remember. There are 3 boxes the ballot box, I've already screwed it up.
The jury box,
Yes.
And
the ballot box.
The mailbox, and the cartridge box.
All right. I needed to have that up in front of me. That was not that was not something that I was going to be pulling right straight from my head, because my head isn't what it was. Anyway, let's move to this next one. And Alex, you and I talked about this one a lot yesterday. This is a Stephen Gutowski story off of the Reload. Gun stores in multiple New York counties will now be forced to warn people against buying their products. Albany County passed an ordinance on Monday requiring gun dealers to post a warning about purported dangers of gun ownership. Those who don't comply with the ordinance could face a $1,000 fine or up to 15 days in jail. Ordinance is nearly identical to one passed by Winchester County in June. I'm going to go ahead and read the warning here. Access to a weapon or firearm in the home significantly increases the risk of suicide, homicide, death during domestic disputes, and unintentional deaths to children, household members, and others. If you or a loved one is experiencing distress and or depression, call the Crisis Prevention and Response Team at area code 914-925-5959 or the National Suicide Hotline at 988. As Alex and I discussed yesterday, I have no problem with the gun stores posting that last sentence. I could be helpful. It certainly couldn't hurt anything. Where I have a problem is the state saying, this is basically forced speech, the state saying to the gun stores, you have to say this. That rubs me the wrong way. We're going to start with Alex, because this should be fairly fresh in your mind. We just talked about it yesterday, man. I'll let you have another crack at it. What do you think?
Yeah, so we all know that First Amendment protects the right free speech. And ordinarily, we think of the First Amendment as protect. But this is a little different because it's compelling speech. It's forcing these businesses to speak, to post this signage. And it would be comparable somewhat to warning labels on tobacco products or nutrition labels on food products. And unfortunately, through convoluted leaps of logic, the courts have upheld warnings like this. Now, what I'll say is that this particular warning is a little different in that it makes some statements that are, in my recollection, in my understanding of the data, are untrue or at least maybe not completely true. Because it says significantly, having a firearm in the home significantly increases the risk of suicide, homicide, death during domestic disputes, etc. And I don't think that there's data that supports that assertion. In fact, there's some data, at least to the contrary. So the courts, like I said, have gone through these convoluted leaps of logic to uphold compelling commercial speech. They don't think that commercial speech deserves the same level of protection as individual speech. But nevertheless, the purpose of compelling commercial speech is to promote the free flow of information from producer and seller to the consumer. Well, and the truthful conveyance of that information. So I don't think that this is true. I think it may be, in fact, be misleading. So I think there may be some challenge to this. It would be difficult, but on the other hand, the other thing that's concerning to me about this is that, like we talked about yesterday, Paul, a lot of these are under the guise of public health, a lot of requirements like this. Mm-hmm. And it's like, let's identify and sometimes make up these public health problems. And then by making it a public health issue, that therefore means that the government needs to step in and regulate the supposed problem. And I think this is a response by politicians primarily saying that we've done something, okay, and that something is controlling firearms and gun dealers, not addressing the real problem, which is mental health.
Absolutely. Mike, what do you think, bud?
Clearly against this, though, right, Paul? This is this ridiculous. This is the state forcing their agenda, the liberal portion of the state forcing their agenda upon these licensed dealers. And I understand that they have to. There's really no alternative other than take the fine and take the 15 days in jail every time you don't post it. But I just wrote this sitting here, Paul. So I'd post the sign that they want and then post this one next to it. Warning, anti-gun politicians have ordered the posting of false information. It is your right to arm yourself to protect yourself and your family. Throw a few other words in there and then end it with, please call your local politician at this phone number and tell him how you feel. So I'd put my own sign up right up next to it and give people the alternative to see.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Charles, what do you think, man?
I agree with that suggestion. It was going to be the second thing I suggested, but I would add to it that I would post that sign, but on the bottom of it I would put posted under duress and against my will, which is exactly the way my father used to sign my report card in grade school. So and where I learned it. The other thing is, this is a straight up First Amendment violation. You cannot compel speech. And the First Amendment was intended to protect against compelled speech. Now, there's an interesting case on this, and by the way, it's called Lathrop. Lathrop v. Donahue. Justice Black noted, and it wasn't a dissenting opinion, I'll note, quote, I can think of few plainer, more direct abridgments of the freedom of the First Amendment than to compel persons to support candidates, parties, ideologies, or causes that they are against, unquote. That's from Lathrop v. Donahue in 1961. And I think when you have a Supreme Court justice in a case called Lathrop specifically saying you can't compel speech, I think it's pretty telling that the idea of the First Amendment was that speech not be compelled. And if it is, pointing out that it is may actually almost be a more powerful argument by saying posted under duress and against our will. There's nothing in the order that says, as long as you post what the county did say, there's nothing to prohibit you from putting what you say alongside it or underneath it. And saying posted under duress and against my will, any lawyer will tell you signing something that way invalidates the signature.
Yeah.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I agree that it should be a violation of the First Amendment, but the courts have made this distinction with respect to commercial speech, and in some circumstances uphold compelled commercial speech because as long as it serves some rational government interest, they generally uphold it. Now, that's completely different than compelling an individual to speak, at least in the eyes of the courts. I don't agree with that, but I think that that's the way that courts have come down on this issue. Now, that's with respect. Oh, go ahead.
No, if a store is owned by an individual, they are in essence compelled by derivation. They're compelling individual speech.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just telling you that the courts disagree with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
probably akin to putting
the
probably akin, Alex, tell me if I'm right, to put in the Surgeon General's warning ordered on cigarette packs. You know, they've determined it's a health issue, so they've ordered it, and that's been upheld.
We brought that up yesterday too. Is the Surgeon General's warning on cigarettes,
and that you shouldn't drink alcohol if you're pregnant. You know, that's on just about every alcohol container.
Right.
Can I point out that the Second Amendment does not say the right to keep and smoke cigarettes shall not be impaired?
Yeah,
you're right.
You're right.
You're right.
Right. And we touched on this briefly yesterday. You know, that's the question. Does this sort of restriction burden the Second Amendment right in any way? And I think it does, but is it enough to basically review this under a Second Amendment challenge? Does this inhibit people from exercising their right to keep and bear arms? And I think there is some chilling effect, but the question then is whether there's enough there, and whether the analysis under Bruin would even apply.
Yeah,
but we know that New York doesn't care about the challenge. You know, we know that New York is going to. You look at everything they've done in the past couple of weeks since Bruin. You know, their attitude is we're going to do it. We're New York, and we'll wait 5 or 10 years if the Supreme Court gets around to it and deal with it then, and then pass another law that's against the most recent decision. Yep. New York doesn't care. They believe they're bigger than the rest of the country, and they can do what they want.
The death of 1,000 cuts. Can I point something out about Arizona?
Certainly.
Juxtaposing it with New York, if I may, for just a moment, and not to brag, but over the last 18 years, we've applied their theory to them, and we have stuck their tailpipe down their carburetor, and we have been committing the death of 1,000 cuts to anti-freedom measures in Arizona, and been largely successful, although we only get about 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 of the bills that we advocate for passed. We have marched steadily in the direction of freedom and done to them what they've done to us for 40 years.
Yes, absolutely. I was actually able to go down to I believe it was in March of this year that the rally at the Capitol was held. I was able to go there this year. I plan on going back next year and bringing a lot of the setup that I use for GRPC and doing some broadcast work from there. I'm very, very grateful what Arizona has done. They in an essence, they showed the nation, especially when it comes to constitutional carry, they really led the nation in constitutional, being among the first for constitutional carry. And whenever another state says, "Oh, the blood will run on the streets," well, it really hasn't in Arizona. Well, you don't have big cities. Well, Phoenix isn't a big city.
Well,
you know, fifth largest in the country. Yeah.
I want to get this comment up here real quick. Pete over at Gun Websites talking about the boxes: the soap box, the ballot box, jury box, mailbox, and cartridge box. There we go.
He's right.
So let's our next story then.
By the way, Pete
Yeah.
is an unsung hero in the right to keep and bear arms. He has worked tirelessly in Arizona to do a lot of great things, and with just very little compensation for it. He really is a tireless worker for the right to keep and bear arms.
And Pete also shows up a lot at places like Gun Rights Policy Conference, AmCon. I travel a lot to do what I do, and I see Pete quite often at a lot of these functions. And I don't believe Pete's employed by, anybody that would provide his travel, so he's picking this up on his own dime.
He's crowdfunded.
Okay. All right. Next story
And
I've
I'm part
got.
of the crowd.
Next story I got. North Carolina County adds AR-15 to schools for classroom defense. This one's an AWR Hawkins story. This is off Breitbart. USA Today reported Madison County Sheriff Buddy Harwood pushed for the AR-15s following the attack. This is the Uvalde attack, pointing out he did not want evil people to be able to enter the school and hole up in a classroom with officers powerless to act. Harwood said, "Hopefully we'll never need it, but I want my guys to be as prepared can be. We were able to put an AR-15 rifle and safe in all of our schools in the county. We've also got breaching tools to go into those safes. We've got extra magazines with ammo in those safes. In the event someone barricaded a door, we won't have to wait on the fire department. We'll have those tools to be able to breach that door if needed. I do not want to have to run back to the car to grab an AR, because that's time lost." Guys, this Sheriff Harwood, this is a guy that gets it. And this is a guy that looked at what happened, decided this is something we can do here, and in my county, we're going to do it. Good on this, Sheriff. Mike, I haven't led with you yet. I'm going to start with you this time. What do you think, bud?
Yeah, of course, the liberal left led this story with, sheriff puts rifles in schools for teachers, and we know that's totally false. All you had to do was take a look at it. And just to clarify that, the way they've set this up, they have officers in these schools or deputies in these schools already, and they move throughout the school. Whether it's 5 buildings, 10 buildings, or whatever. So they found one place centrally located to take a safe. They bolt that safe into the ground, into the wall. It's going nowhere. No one's taken it. They've put the standard rifle firearm that the law enforcement officer uses. They put extra ammo in there. They've got the breaching tools, probably more of whatever else that individual wants in there. And this is so when something happens at the school, if something happens at the school, it's easier for him to access. He doesn't have to run outside to the patrol car and come back in. Or if another officer happens to respond to it, and while that school officer is elsewhere on the campus, they can get to the equipment. This is not for civilians or teachers to be breaking into and using guns to do whatever they want. This is strictly law enforcement pre-staging equipment, much the same way the fire department does with hoses and fire extinguishers and everything else throughout the school.
Absolutely. Yeah, you'll see often in schools, especially around me, that you'll see that there is fire hose in the hallways, in these cabinets,
Yeah.
and you just need to break open the glass, grab the hose, turn the crank, and there comes the water. I don't see a lot of schools getting washed down with fire hoses. So, anyway, Charles, what do you think about it?
You mentioned that, but it's been since the laws came in to prevent fires in schools, and they started putting things into the infrastructure of schools. It's been 55 years since a child has been lost in a public school to a fire.
That is great news, and I'd love to see. Honestly, the FASTER program, which started in Ohio, is now in Arizona, is in Colorado as well. I'd love to see that go nationwide, and teachers that are willing are able to arm themselves, and that would be that would be the biggest step I believe we could make to ending these tragedies in schools. Charles, what do you think, man?
I want to go on record as saying I support their right to keep and bear hoses. However, I will suggest also that I think that the sheriff in North Carolina is strategically leaving out an important thing to put some teddy bears in there to give out after the incident. But getting to the reality here, I think the sheriff is making a good point. He's sending a really good signal, and they might come in handy. But any arriving deputy or deputy on the school is likely to already have an AR on a sling when they come out of their patrol car if they're going into a school, and they won't want to stop to open a safe, even if they're already the deputy on duty. I also realize that they don't want the deputy on duty walking around the school with a rifle. The optics of it aren't great. So even though there's nothing wrong with it, the optics of it aren't great. I think breaching tools are an excellent idea, but frankly, if I were a deputy, my car kit would include a fireman's axe, a sledgehammer, and a ram, and they would all be at my own expense, and I wouldn't ask my department to reimburse me. I would consider that part of my Boy Scout oath to have them on board in the car. Not that I want to be running with a ram and a fire axe if I'm a cop, but any point in a storm. Second of all schools should have the local deputies train at the school occasionally, and obviously the school resource officer will be training and walks the school and knows it. But they should know the back ways into the school. And the other thing is all schools should be built or re-engineered to have an escape route for both the kids and the staff. And you wouldn't see these fish in a barrel shootings if that happened. To include, I went to a school that was 4 stories tall in Chicago. To include a means of escaping from the 4th floor, maybe a tube and a pad at the bottom or something, where if you landed, maybe you might hurt yourself a little bit, but you wouldn't die in a school shooting. And I think we ought to start looking at designing schools that way. And again, I'll echo what you said earlier, that all schools should have a faster style program available for those who can pass it. Authorize any certified staff member or teacher to carry, and they should look at changing their state law so that the individual school boards, we have a circumstance in Tucson where Tucson is so far left of center that it redefines left. And the reason that state preemption exists in Arizona is specifically because of Tucson and all the crap they would try to pull to impair the right to keep and bear arms. We need legislation that says that any faster or faster equivalent certification should require the district to allow that person to be armed in the school, whether they want it, whether the school board wants it or not.
I'll say this: the only thing good that I know that has ever come out of Tucson is Sonoran hot dogs. And other than that, I don't think a lot of great stuff has come out of Tucson, at least this century, or last. So,
Mo Udall, even though a Democrat, was a fairly decent guy.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. No, Barry Goldwater was from up north. Yeah, you're probably right.
All right, let me get this comment in here real quick. John over on the Facebook side, speaking of the safes with the ARs, I would think a trained school employee should have the combination too. I'm right with you. With the faster program, the teachers bring their own firearms and conceal carry them in the classroom. So they would use what they have first. And if there's, still a need, they could go and get that.
Yeah. Think about the effects of what we're looking at. You've got, first off, this is the law enforcement locker. All right, so they're keeping their gear in there. This Sheriff Harwood, has managed to get additional firepower into the school to be able to protect those children. That's step 1, right? He's got that past the county and everybody else. I'm sure step 2 behind it is something like faster, or something like allowing teachers that already are licensed to carry or can carry to let them carry in school. And then perhaps from there, the teachers get their own locker that they get to. I don't want the mixing of the law enforcement stuff and the civilian stuff, because then you got to worry about turning around and you open it up to use it and your stuff's gone, or somebody borrowed your bullets to go hunting this weekend.
Yeah.
I agree. I think law enforcement, as much as sometimes I disagree with some of the way it operates occasionally, I think that law enforcement needs to have that locker be secured to law enforcement. Yeah. There's nothing worse than a cop expecting that the rifle will be there and it's gone. And I really think, and furthermore, I think that handguns are much more applicable to the local problem, to solving the tactical issue. the immediate and the super immediate threat of having somebody with an aggressor in the classroom with the same room with the kids to be able to quickly, on the U.S. Marshal standard or faster, of getting a couple rounds into the A zone of the target is far more fecund with a sidearm than it is with an AR, unless you're wearing it strapped in the class, and that the optics of that aren't great either. They'll work against us.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot to add to this discussion. It's been a good discussion. I think you're right, Mike, that this is a good first step by the sheriff in Madison County. But the ideal solution is for the teachers to be armed because,
Yes.
as we know, most mass shootings occur in gun-free zones, and the sooner that someone can intervene, the fewer casualties there are going to be. And if teachers are armed and trained, they can intervene before an officer can arrive on scene, acquire the rifle that's in the safe or the one that they've brought in with them. So the optimal solution is for the teachers to be armed. But this is a good first step.
Absolutely. I want to move on to our next story. Fifth Circuit considers whether the Trump administration was legally authorized to ban bump stocks. This off of Reason.com. 3 years ago, a federal ban on bump stock type devices took effect, transforming otherwise law-abiding owners of such firearms accessories into felons overnight. Despite its severe and startling consequences, the ban was never approved by Congress. It was unilaterally imposed by the Trump administration, which expanded the statutory definition of machine gun to include bump stocks and rifles equipped with them. Firearms Policy Coalition explains in a brief it recently filed with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit that redefinition defies any reasonable public meaning of the language of the statute and leads to absurd results. And full disclosure, I'm an employee of the Second Amendment Foundation. I do appreciate. I have had a relationship with Firearms Policy Coalition in the past. They're good people over there. They do good work. I'm very hopeful they are successful in this one. And Alex, if I'm right, Fifth Circuit, isn't that Texas, Louisiana, that area?
That's correct.
So we're not talking ninth where it's California, Hawaii. This is, I think, has got a very good chance of clearing the bar here.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the important point here is that whether or not you agree with banning bump stocks, there's got to be a separation of powers. And the Constitution doesn't authorize the executive branch, which the ATF is a part of the executive branch, to impose, legislation, basically, or policy without congressional approval. So, and this article makes that point at the end of the article, and I think that's the most important point, is that the ATF just, by fiat, declaring what a firearm is or redefining a firearm without congressional approval, I think is a violation of the separation of powers.
And there's a few other, the ghost gun ban, which we also talked about yesterday, and the forced reset trigger ban. Those, if this is successful, I think automatically fall away because those are, again, ATF fiats. The ATF said this is the way it is because we say that's the way it is. And if this is successful, those fall apart too.
Not to jump off the bump stocks, I want to talk about that, but I know the forced reset trigger lawyer has already filed a petition based on the West Virginia versus EPA decision out of the Supreme Court last month. So they're taking that avenue now, that the ATF does not have the authority to write their own law and write their own promulgate their own rules and regulations. That has to come out of Congress and be published. So they're already working on that. Bump stocks. Listen, Sixth Circuit last year, I think it was beginning of last year, decided it was unconstitutional. It was a big deal then. Waiting for that to come back around. It's going to happen. I'm a firm believer that when this issue came up, during the Trump administration, and he put everybody in the room together and sat there for an hour and a half, putting them on TV and making Pelosi sit across the table. And they tried to come up with an agreement, and he said, let's ban them and do due process second. And that's the soundbite that everybody's taken from there. But that was him baiting the other side. If you watch that whole hour and a half ordeal, my firm belief is that he did this he banned them and written out, executive order to take that heat off the NRA at the time, because we were facing so much other ridiculousness coming out of them, and that he knew, based on the judges he was appointing, that this would eventually be overturned. And that's what we saw happen in the 6th, and that's what's going on now in the 5th. So it's my belief he did that to defer this topic, and rather than lose firearms, we lost an accessory temporarily.
Hopefully temporarily. It's not a done deal yet, but I agree with you.
Right.
I believe it's going to be temporary. Charles, you want to chime in on it before I go to comments? Anything you want to chime in on this one about?
I do. In full disclosure, Arizona Citizens Defense League has a brief, an amicus brief on the case in the 6th Circuit on the bump stock case. So we have a dog in the fight too, even though it's way out of our district, and we don't normally do legal issues. We did have briefs on Heller, who could dislike a case called Heller et al., and also on the McDonald case in Chicago. So once in a while, we do get our appendage in the ringer, and we have in this case as well. And I agree with the previous statement.
All right. I do want to get some comments up. Going back to teachers in the classroom. Get this one up. Gun websites. Pete says, question: tactics and strategy is debatable, but this optic that the school is armed will prevent the planning of such atrocities. No. Well, I don't recall, since the FASTER program went through in Ohio, I don't recall a school shooting there. Doesn't mean there isn't one. It's just there hasn't been one that caught my attention. I don't.
There has been a.
Go, Charles.
If I may, there has been a thing. There has been a save of a FASTER trained person by a FASTER trained person in Ohio. A contractor was using one of the large. It's not a circular saw. What do you call it? The one that has the handle on the back and on the top with the huge 7.5-inch blade. What saw do you call that?
A chop saw?
Whatever kind of saw it is. No, a handheld. But anyway, a contractor was using one. It bounced out of the wood and hit him in the femoral artery on the right leg. And a FASTER trained coach was carrying a tourniquet and saved the guy's life. So there has been a FASTER save, although it had nothing to do with firearms.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and let's point out that the FASTER training is not just firearms training. There's also training in medical care in there, triage and emergency medical care. Let's get this next one up here. Mike White says, despite what a lot of people think, Trump was no big friend of the Second Amendment, in my opinion. Well, I'm going to say, Mike, in one way he was, and that is in the judges he appointed. Especially with Amy Coney Barrett, and now having a much larger originalist majority in the Supreme Court, Trump in that way was a huge friend to the Second Amendment.
Yeah, some of these comments I get like that, and I would love to have the opportunity to sit down and talk to these people, because look what your alternative was. 4 years of Hillary. What do you think happens to your Second Amendment rights then? He was the greatest proponent of Second Amendment rights for 4 years that we could have, because look what we didn't have.
Yes, I would absolutely agree.
He was also the only president since Theodore Roosevelt that ever had a carry permit in New York City.
You're right.
And I just want to echo the point about the judges, because Heller was decided in 2008 and McDonald was decided in 2010. And then it wasn't until this year that another Second Amendment case was decided. And that's largely because at the time that McDonald was decided, the court was very closely split on the issue of the Second Amendment. Heller and McDonald were both decided by a 5-4 majority. So the court was very closely divided on the Second Amendment, and the court, I think, was reluctant, at least the conservative justices on the court were reluctant to accept the review of Second Amendment challenges because they didn't know how it would come out. And that changed when Trump nominated Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. And the balance of the court changed so that Second Amendment challenges could be reviewed by the Supreme Court with the likely favorable outcome.
Yeah, and Mike,
The
you were
day
saying
Scalia died.
go. Yes,
Sorry.
I think I know where you're going. Go. Yes.
Yeah, the day Scalia died in 2016, the opportunity they would have had for a favorable decision until the appointment of Gorsuch and Barrett.
Mike, you were saying you wish you could have a conversation with these people. Mike's phone number is area code 321.
You know what? But it's funny you say that, Paul. Come to GRPC. That's the place where you sit down with those of us that are on these panels that help make or suggest laws, and we'll sit and talk to anyone after those classes, and in the lobby, the bar, wherever it happens to be. We want, as much as we are the men of the people. We still want to talk to everybody else and get everybody's opinion in there. It's the actual place that I've met people there that I'm awestruck by that have argued these Second Amendment cases and get to sit and listen to them. I've made very good friends there that are people that just came to GRPC to see GRPC, and now I listen to them all the time talk about their issues around the country with Second Amendment battles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to, as long as I've got Charles here, I want to plug GRPC a little bit, and I want to plug it both. You need to be there because you get to meet people like Mike, like Alan Gottlieb, like Alan Gura has been there several times. My very first GRPC I ever went to, I was able to talk one-on-one with Alan Gura, and that floored me, and I've never missed one since then. But it's incredibly amazing experience if you can get there in person. If you can't, Charles and I make sure that you can catch it wherever you're at. If you go to the SAF's Facebook or YouTube channel, and I believe it's going to be broadcast this year on OpsLens as well, GRPC will be out on the internet, and you can watch it live. Charles makes sure the audio is clean and does good. I make sure the video goes out. So, but yeah, and Charles, you've attended more of these than I have. You were at my very first one. What I'm going to have you give your 30-second elevator speech. Why should people go to GRPC?
Well, they should go because they should stay far away from the AV table where they won't trip over any cables or disturb us.
Amen.
No. They should go to GRPC because it gives you a holistic view of what's going on in the right to keep and bear arms. It gives you, there's many different panels where you can learn about all the different scope of the enforcement of the right to keep and bear arms. Because if you listen to the mainstream media, all you get is the headlines, and the headlines are against us. But if you go to GRPC, you gain a lot of hope generated by information as to the type of things that are going on to reestablish our rights.
Absolutely. I'm going to check over here quick, and let me get this one up. Again, Pete over at Gun Website's 37th Annual Gun Rights Policy Conference will be held September 30th through October 2nd in Dallas, Texas. And if you want to register, saf.org/GRPC. And again, if you can get there, please do get there. And when I'm not pushing buttons, when I'm not hip deep in trying to make sure the broadcast goes out, please look me up. I'd love to shake your hand and say hi. I really cherish getting out and meeting people and talking to people when I'm at these things. There are times, and Charles, I'm sure you'll agree with this, there are times when I've got everything on my plate completely full, and I need to concentrate on what I'm doing and nothing else. And don't bother me then, but if there's not anything going on the stage, chances are I'm free to talk. So
I call it the theory of the seventh window. 6 windows open on things I'm monitoring between the recording and the audio in the room. And then somebody comes along and asks me something on the 7th window, and excuse me, I'll be with you in just a minute. Instead comes out, what?
I've had a few of those whats come at me. I really have.
I become the microphone Nazi. I just who I am. You give me a responsibility to execute a function and make sure that every person hears every word, and anything that gets between me and that purpose is going to get steamrollered. And at my weight, that steamroller is going to hurt.
Roderick says, I was at 2018 GRPC and had the opportunity to pick attorney David Segal's mind about the McDonald case. Yeah, there are a lot of first-class Second Amendment attorneys that attend these, as well as some of the people I'm leaving out that should be mentioned. Dr. John Lott is there almost every year, and I've learned tons by talking with Dr. Lott. Anything you want to learn about relating to the Second Amendment, you can learn it there. And oh, by the way, if you attend in person, the SAF gives you over $100 worth of books for the attendees, and there's no charge. And there's no charge for the conference. You show up, they give it to you. So, and then Pete over at Gun Website, Chicago GRPC was a good one. The Chicago, the one that sticks out in my mind, was the year before I started broadcasting. At that time, I drove truck for a living. I get there, I'm staying with a buddy at his house. I get there, I wake up, and some nut that worked as a air traffic controller decided he was going to mess up everything for everybody, and on Friday of GRPC, lights fires in the control center and shuts down air traffic for most of the northern United States. Between what couldn't, and Chicago itself was shut down, but that just created a ripple effect. Most of the air traffic in the United States, when people were trying to get to GRPC, was closed down. That was an interesting one.
That's why you drive. Can I make a comment about GRPC? We got time?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the most interesting people I met at Virginia RPC a number of years ago was Dick Heller's original attorney, whose name is Dane von Breikenruckert, common spelling. And Dane, the reason that case was called Heller was because the other 5 plaintiffs didn't gain standing, but Heller did, based on Dane von Breikenruckert's advice to Dick Heller, which is you get your backside down to the DC Police Department and bring a gun to register and get a letter of rejection. And that letter of rejection was the only thing that gave Dick Heller standing in District of Columbia versus Heller, because he had a piece of paper that he could show the court that says, I'm damaged, I'm a victim, here's my evidence. And that's the thing that preserved standing in the Heller District of Columbia versus Heller case.
Yep.
And I learned that I would not have learned that had I not gone to GRPC. I actually learned that at the airport there, talking to Dane in line. Not actually at GRPC, but he wouldn't have been there and I wouldn't have been there at the same time in the same place in line had we not been at GRPC.
We're gonna skip around in stories a little bit. I want to go to the last one I have on the page, and that this one is kind of on you, Charles, because you suggested it and you're there. In Arizona, it's now armed robbery if you attempt to steal a weapon. If somebody attempts to steal a gun, that's armed robbery now.
Right. In Arizona, you cannot use deadly force to protect personal property. I've been teaching the CCW class in Arizona for 29 years now, and the, the you can't use deadly force to protect personal property. You can use deadly force to protect residential property, but not personal property. If somebody's trying to steal your car, you cannot point a gun at them, not unless they're trying to run you over with your own car, and that's aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and you can. But stealing stuff or damaging stuff is a property crime, and Arizona does not apply the ability to use deadly force in one of those crimes. Well, if someone's trying to take the gun off your hip, your gun is a piece of personal property. Now, once they gain control of your gun, it's now an armed robbery. But it's a little late for that unless you carry a backup and are very fast with it. And why let it escalate to that point? For years, we have been trying and finally succeeded this year in a year where we got 2 out of 7 of our bills through the legislature and signed by the governor. This is one of the 2, and it's the most important this year. And it says if someone is attempting to take a gun from you, they are committing an armed robbery, and you are now authorized, if it's necessary, and as Masad Ayub says, in the gravest extreme, if it's now necessary to use deadly force, you have a justification for it. It's a very important piece of law, but it's something that no one would ever think about unless they were living under that constraint. And this refers to what I was talking about earlier about the long march back to the full right to keep and bear arms.
I'm surprised that Arizona, as forward as your laws are, there, Charles. You didn't have this. I know in Florida, this is on the books. I went back and reread it twice. I'm like, I couldn't believe you guys didn't have this. Florida is the same way. If you just make sure we understand what we're talking about. Charles is talking about when you attempt to take the firearm from a person, from an individual. And if you try to take that from them, it goes from a strong arm robbery to an armed robbery at that point. We have that in Florida as well. It goes even further with burglary. If you steal a gun while committing a burglary, now it's an armed burglary. So you add additional charges to it as well. So I'm very surprised that you guys didn't have it, and congratulations for getting it pushed through.
Yeah, I'll brag a little. Guess whose idea at ACCDL this was? So I will tell you also that we have the same thing with burglary. Burglary of an occupied dwelling is a burglary in the second degree, but burglary of an occupied dwelling on possession of a dangerous weapon or a deadly instrument or an accelerant is a class 1 burglary, a burglary in the first degree. So we did have that in Arizona, and like I said, we were able to get this passed. There are a number of other things, like we'd like to adopt the Texas system about CCW permits in government buildings. There's no law in Arizona against having a gun in a government building unless they post a sign, and if they do, they're required to put in lockers where you can store. But there's no requirement for security at the building, so you know very well what's going to happen. You and I, the honest guys, are going to go, oh, it's not allowed in here, we'll check our guns. The bad guy looks at that and says, oh boy, fresh meat.
Yep. And I refer to this from time to time. There was a proposed, I thought this became law, but I may be wrong. There was a proposed law in Tennessee where if you create a gun-free zone, you are then responsible for the safety of all individuals in that gun-free zone. And if somebody is injured by a bad guy, you are liable for that loss to that person, whether it be medical expenses or whether it be the loss of their life. You're then liable to their family. I would love to see that, if it did not become law and become law in every state. I don't want that to be a nationwide thing, but I'd love to see every state adopt it.
Yeah, I remember that being
in
proposed.
Arizona, we tried.
Passed, yeah.
In Arizona, we tried it. It'll never pass in Arizona as long as the current circumstance exists where the Chamber of Commerce has a fee simple estate on the governor's gonads.
All right. Well, hey, we're coming up on the hour that we've been on the air. We were late, but we're late coming in and we're late going out. But I want to stay close to the hour. I'm going to start with you, Charles. Again, first time you've been with us. if on our way out, if you would please tell us where they can find Liberty Watch Radio and anything else you want to plug today, man.
LibertyWatchRadio.com. You can go on the recent archive page and listen to the last 6 months. I've had some stunningly good guests in the last 6 months. And I actually read the book. I've got a guy coming on tomorrow, sitting right here in front of me. That as soon as we get off the air, I'll be back to reading the last 300 pages of. So I'll do a decent interview tomorrow. But LibertyWatchRadio.com. If you look on the website, you can see how to stream it live. It's through the radio station. I won't bore you with more URLs. If you want more information on Arizona Citizens Defense League, it's azcdl.org. That's azcdl.org. I'm also the spokesman for the Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, which is jpfo.org. You should go and sign up for their alerts. They have very, very, very good writing and very good articles and just an archive of years and years and years of right to keep and bear arms references.
Very cool. Mike, I'm going to move to you because you got to get out of here. You got to go to Arms Room Radio in just a few minutes. Plug that.
Yeah, we got Arms Room Radio coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern here. Just go to armsroomradio.com and you can listen live there or find out what stations we're on in your part of the country. And then, of course, the rundown.us at 5 o'clock Eastern during the weeks. Tune in there.
All right. And then, Alex, not going to leave you out. Is that you don't have a show of your own, but is there anything you want to plug, bud?
Yeah, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, we've got a law office here in Indiana. Olleylaw.com is our website. If you're interested, we post blogs there periodically. I'm an attorney with my father as well, Mike Olley. We have a practice here in Southern Indiana. We also have a firearms training business, o2gungroup.com, where we teach basic firearms handling and safety, but we also have a legal course about the lawful use of force in self-defense. It's a 5-hour class. We think it covers the minimum requirements that people need to know to be responsibly armed and understand when they are or are not justified in using deadly force. So if you're interested in any of those things, check out those websites.
Very cool. On my end, that's going to wrap up our broadcast week here for The Bullet. I want to thank you all for coming along, and especially thank everybody that's commented and added your thoughts into the broadcasts. And really, that does make my job easier and a lot more fun when you're involved live on the air with us. Thanks to everybody that's watched, and please come join us again next week, Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Central Time, and on Saturday at noon. That's going to do it for us today, and thanks for watching.